Welcome to the Nonprofits. For our fourth and final story this week, we take a look at what a Christian seminary student had to say about the Black Lives Matter movement. Black Lives Matter movement. I'm sure it's a very fair and considerate op-ed piece. Jonathan Raudebush, let's dive right in.
Yeah, the op-ed is trying to associate Black Lives Matter movement's relevance in the society with the acquittal of a white man in the death of a black man, trying to frame it in racial terms. But was it? Did BLM have anything to do with the case of homeless man Jordan Neely, a black man who was asphyxiated by a white former Marine, Daniel Perry, on basically a train, on a subway? So the entire article is weirdly saying that BLM is fading from the public consciousness because a man who was skilled enough to use a chokehold to subdue someone is acquitted in court. So 12 jurors represent the entire populace of New York City. He choked him for about 6 minutes trying to subdue him. Note, most people are unconscious if they are healthy and fit in 10 seconds if you're using a stranglehold, which cuts off the blood supply to the brain and the airway. But we don't know if that's what he did. A video showed that it was improperly, if not not consistently applied. This was evaluated by the same Marine who had taught combat to Penny himself. So the writer said that Penny's acquittal was a sign that the U.S. public no longer believes the lying rhetoric of Marxist BLM movement. Was this the case? Was this case about race, or was it about a mentally ill homeless man acting out on a subway and threatening people? When Jordan threatened a pregnant woman, Daniel Petty acted to protect her. The DA saw that differently and prosecuted Penny for negligent homicide and manslaughter. The manslaughter charge was dropped. An example of the spin that Wolf states, BLM from its inception has proven itself not just about advocating for racial justice, but also as a vehicle for promoting anti-American and anti-white rhetoric, division, and chaos. Not biased at all. What do you guys think?
Well, before we find out what we think, Jonathan, I want to hear a little bit more about what you think first. The author said, quote, Penny employed a chokehold, which you've mentioned, a technique from his military training in what was clearly an act of self-defense of others. Okay, so that was the quote from the op-ed. And I assume that he's kind of implying that the force that he was using was appropriate and not excessive. So you're a military man. What can you comment on that?
Well, there's two types of things here. Chokes, which is just airway obstruction, can take up to several minutes to render a well-conditioned person unconscious. Depends on the person, and how the choke is applied. Strangles or strangulation is about cutting off the blood supply, and that happens within seconds because no blood to the brain, no consciousness. So, and it basically compresses the carotid artery and the jugular veins, making sure that no blood goes in or out of the head. So that's what happens. It can also compress the airway, the trachea, the larynx, and so that can also cause asphyxia. The ME said asphyxia. So I assume he was cutting the airway, but I have no way of knowing for sure. The Marines I worked with when I was in the Amphib Navy, I believe they use strangleholds in combat training as described above. If he was still moving after several minutes, the hold was either improperly applied or just a chokehold. In either case, Penny should have known that holding either one of those types of chokes more than 2 to 3 minutes could possibly result in permanent brain damage or damage to the individual. Evidently, he was not looking at his watch, and I wonder why not.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. but people react the way they're trained. Is the last thing I'll say for this go around.
So was he acting appropriate to his training? The amount of force that he used, was that to be expected?
Yeah. I would expect that if he was acting as he was trained, he probably was doing the best he could in that situation with the restrictions of the space that he was in. But then again, I wasn't there, so I'm not an expert in hand-to-hand combat. So, I couldn't say whether or not he did it right. But apparently, his instructor said he didn't. So.
Well, I mean, you have a dead guy, right? Somebody died because of this. So, and that brings me, Stephen, I wanted to ask you, following the following about Daniel Penny's acquittal, this is what the author had to say. His act of courage, protecting the vulnerable in a moment of chaos, resonance with the Christian call to stand up for one's neighbor in times of need. Now, a man is now dead because Penny stood up. Do you think that the acquittal of Daniel Penny is in alignment with the morality and dictates of Christianity, or rather, I should say, the professed morality and dictates of Christianity? Do you think things line up? Is he judging that correctly?
Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." And they will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, a stranger, needing clothes, sick, in prison, and did not help you?" And he will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." And then they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. How telling for the Christian Post to run this story, because there was nothing Christ-like about this. He was protecting his neighbors from being uncomfortable by a problem that we all have to face. You know what's not going to solve homelessness, Scott? Being protected from it. Having homeless people killed in front of us is not going to actually address the homelessness issue, right? But the privileged white guy kills a marginalized black man and got away with it. And this is antithetical to the gospel that the Christian Post is supposed to be promoting. How telling, how unsurprising.
Yeah, not surprising at all. I mean, we see these kind of stories prop up fairly often, and it would be refreshing to hear some Christians complaining about it rather than just, a nonprofit's atheist show and on once a week, right? I want to go over to Kelly for a second real quick here. So this piece spends a lot of time talking and promoting kind of an us versus them outlook. Is this some sort of spiritual axis and allies that they're talking about? What are your thoughts on this chasm that's between the religious right and well, pretty much everyone else? What's the deal there?
Yeah, I think you judged that pretty well. There is a movement to make the Christian right be better and more moral than everybody else. And I think there is a chasm there. I think that chasm is growing wider and wider and wider, but I think they're the ones doing it. I think they're ones who created that chasm, and they're the ones who are making it larger. One of the things that he said in the article was, it's time to move forward, focusing on true equality, not on reversing racial injustices with new ones. And I saw that, and what I read from there, now I don't know if you know anything about the author. I looked into his background a little bit. He's just a rich white guy from the South. He's got a history of his family being rich white guys from the South. So what I read between the lines was, I know it was people just like me, rich white guys from the South that literally kept people like you, but please don't hold that against me now, right? It seems like nothing for an excuse, but for why this dangerous black man was justified in being killed by this heroic white guy, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things, I'm not surprised that he was acquitted. I don't know, a lot of people know I'm a history buff. I remember a lot of things from when I was growing up too, but in the 80s in New York City, on the subway, there was a guy who shot 4 young black men. His name was Bernard Getz. And he actually chased one of the men down through 3 cars and shot him in the back. And he was acquitted of all 4 of those killings. So this didn't surprise me at all.
Jonathan, so this is our 3rd story this week about violence being committed by conservative Christians, basically. And so coming from the God is love crowd, this seems counter message, as Stephen was talking about before. And we also talked about earlier in our earlier segments this week, Kelly mentioned something about, he used the analogy of a cornered animal reacting and, feeling pressured and responding violently that way. Why do you think that these people are being so violent, and is this going to get worse, or is it going to get, is it going to reach a maximum point, or where is this leading us as far as interacting with other human beings?
Well, first off, I'm not sure if Mr. Penny was a Christian or not. It doesn't really, I don't think it says that, does it?
Good point. That's a good point.
And the fact they were accenting the fact he was a Marine. Marines are extremely good fighters. They're trained to fight. They're trained in how to have good judgment about the situation, to react appropriately with appropriate measures. So when that Marine describes the situation and why he did what he did, which he did in this article, briefly in this article, I read a few other things, but I have a very biased opinion that I believe him. I believe that that's what he thought at the time, that he thought that not only was the passengers threatened, but that once he had taken action, that he was also threatened because of the position he was in and he was trying to control, that he felt he was in a vulnerable position. If I'm not that kind of fighter, I don't do that kind of thing on a regular basis. I'm not trained like that. People behave the way they're trained. Firemen run towards a fire. Police run towards an assault. The Marines, run towards an enemy and deal with a problem that way. So this is just a training mindset. I can't fault him for that. I don't think it was racially motivated. This guy came on, was yelling and screaming, was obviously mentally disturbed, and then got in the face of a pregnant woman. At that point, he had enough, and he said, "That's it. I'm done. I'm going to take this guy down and just wait for the police to get here." Right? Unfortunately, he didn't let up. But that could be training too. Marines aren't used to letting people live,
right.
Unless they're told to specifically, so it's like, I'm not an expert on the Marine Corps either, but the military training is pretty intense for these guys, and the experiences are pretty intense. So in that light, I tend to believe him when he says that. However, the Christianization of the fight here, them using this as a us versus them episode, the more we hear that, the more I like you asked, I'm afraid it's going to get worse. This emboldens people. I can kill these people because I'm not going to get convicted, and we keep showing them that over and over again. So this is going to get worse, and before it gets better. And we have to mobilize what we can to combat that. And like we were talking about earlier, BLM is an organization that I don't think we can afford to let fade away. I think we need to make sure that it's still alive and kicking.
Excellent transition to my next question. This one's going to go over to Stephen. Hopefully, looks like we're having a little bit of technical issues there. Hopefully, we can get some more of Stephen's words on this. The title of the piece says, "The age of BLM is over." What do you think he meant by that?
Buzzwords? like on the one hand, like this is something that has struck me just recently, you know, because of, oh, I am sorry, I'm forgetting his name now. In 2020, the black man who was killed by the police officer.
Floyd,
What was his name again?
George Floyd.
Yeah, George Floyd. You know, when George Floyd was murdered, then there was uproar, and that's when we all knew about BLM. And now another black man has been murdered, and
Mhm.
there isn't an uproar. And like maybe that's a piece of it, that finally we can. But I think the meat of the article points to something far more pedantic and inane. The idea that this Marxist ideology of, you know, anti-white racism is coming to an end, and just like, well, like obviously that perspective is completely skewed and doesn't have a place in thinking society. But yeah,
So do you think the author was taking advantage of
believe-
of an event that happened in order to take a poke at one of his favorite targets?
Yeah, maybe he had a writing deadline. He's like, what can I do? What slant can I put on this that will get clicks and get this article picked up? And this was the tripe that he was able to spew out. I think it was a far reach for him to pretend that this was some kind of earnest observation that he was making.
I think he was using the choking death, right? What happened to George Floyd? What started the BLM movement was him getting choked to death. So now here's another black man getting choked to death. The white guy gets acquitted. So obviously the message is, and it seems like what he's saying in the article is, the message is it's okay to choke black men to death.
Interesting.
Yeah, and another thing about the whole thing that's a tragedy is that this poor man was mentally ill and homeless. He was hungry, and he needed everything. He needed clothing, he needed a bath, he needed a place to sleep. He was upset about that. He was ranting about it. And rather than have a system, the failure of our social support system, and addition to the innate racism in society at large, was, I think, the real cause of his death, because he should have been treated in a hospital or treated in a mental health facility, be given all the food he needs, be given clothing, being given shoes if he needs them. And that's what should have happened. And then he wouldn't have been on that train. He wouldn't have forced the doors open and came in ranting about being hungry and, you know, and not caring if he was going to go to jail because at least he'd get food. You know, I mean, the guy, he should have been helped, period. You know, there's no excuse for our society allowing these people to just die. I know they don't like looking at them, and they don't like them in their parks. And we've done stories before about governments trying to move them into camps outside of the city limits so they don't have to look at them. But these are real human beings, and they deserve to be treated like human beings and with respect and dignity. And the lack of that is what torques me the most. It's just this trial, and that I have a lot of opinions about that, as I've already stated. But as a last note, the failure of our government to take care of them and to take care of the veterans as well. When they get out after going into battle conditions and coming back, they're not caught up with the mental health of the military people that came back yet. I don't know if this gentleman has PTSD or anything. I don't think so, because the way he acted, I think he was fine. But a lot of others are still hanging out, and a lot of them are those homeless people.
So you're saying that this was a foreseeable and an avoidable circumstance. Yes. And that really we just dropped the ball, basically. Just the United States government dropped the ball here and let this thing happen. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I'm saying that it's intentional as well.
Oh, okay. Let's take that thought over to Stephen then. So if what we see is not only increased violence and conflict and headbutting and that kind of thing, but an increased tolerance for that kind of thing. People are finding it more and more acceptable to talk about that kind of thing, to support, especially in recent political arena. Right, we've discovered that people are willing to support what they would have earlier thought of as horrendous ideas, horrible ideas, abusive ideas, violent ideas, racist ideas, all this kind of stuff. Do you think that is an indication that maybe this stuff is baked into us as human beings? Is our attempts at building a more peaceful world just folly?
If we look back, I don't know, 500, 1,000 years ago, would we say that those negative qualities are just as present as they were back then? I hope not. I don't think so. I believe that we are, in comparison, a kinder, more thoughtful, more empathetic society,
Okay.
civilization. So, can I then extrapolate that and say, okay, 1,000 years down the road, if we survive, things will be just that much more better? I hope so. Is it wired into us right now? Sure. The good and the bad, but I think that we're changing that wiring slowly, bit by bit, and even if we have setbacks like we are looking at right now, I'm a man of faith. I gotta have faith that we can and will improve and get better. And even if our current generation is shot, those of us who have eyes to see will know that we need to take care of the next generation. We need to be sowing those seeds and raising up people who will, inch that ball down the field just another inch.
Kelly, I know you had one last thing you wanted to say, but I also want to get your opinion on what Stephen was just saying. Do you think that we can make progress on this? Do you think that we're moving in the right direction? I mean, by some measures, as Stephen pointed out, we're better than we were 500 years ago, but on the other hand, we're worse off than we were maybe 10 years ago, or at least it appears that way, 15, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, things like that. Are we making progress? Is this a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of situation? Or what are your thoughts there?
Even if we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, we're still progressing, right? So yeah, I do see us slipping back right now, but in the long run, like you said, we've come a long way in just the last 100 years. So when we slip back 5, while it hurts us and we see it as being something really bad, if you look at it in the big long run, it's really not that big of a deal. And I think it's important for us to keep that in focus. And it's also important for us to keep in the focus that it doesn't have to keep continuing, that if we stand up, we can stop this and get back on the track we were on before and keep progressing like we were before, which we will do eventually, I'm sure, because unfortunately for conservatives, reality has a liberal view. So there's just a liberal bias in the world. I did want to point out a couple of things, as you mentioned. One was that this article was written by somebody who was in Trump's administration and is most likely going to be back inside of Trump's administration, something to keep in mind. I also wanted to point out that this is from the Christian Post. The Christian Post, and it goes back to something I've been saying all week. This is an organization. It's supposed to represent the message of peace and love that Jesus supposedly taught. At least that's the message that a lot of Christians I know that I talk to, and the ones that call into the shows keep telling us. I got a message for those people. Hi, folks. I know I say a lot of things that you don't like, and I just want to let you know, I don't hate you. I don't even hate your belief, as long as you keep it to yourself. But when you talk about messages of peace and love, I'm all for it. I'm an old hippie. But let me give you a hint. When you need to rein in these guys that are using your Savior's name to spread hate. It makes buying the whole peace and love message a lot harder to swallow when the guy next to you is ignoring over 200 years of prejudices and hate to say even more hateful things while he's using it behind his religion, veiling it behind the religion. I'm just trying to help you out here. You might want to rein these people in. That's all.
Well said, well said. And I think that's a great point for us to end here. I just want to thank all the panelists. Jonathan, I really appreciated your perspective on this last bit here. Kelly, Stephen, always a good time. If any of you out there want to have more good times with the nonprofits, you can do so. And all you have to do is click on the links.